With there being a major content update drought, and most notable balancing issues resolved, I feel like I can finally get to some topics I'm not just covering out of hatred. Bitgain deep dive, hot cocoa analysis, maybe a frostbite archetype breakdown if the upcoming weekly brings something big to the table. Wait, it's nearing October. You gotta be kidding me. With Capac comes a mini-boss from the Zorand era, which is fundamentally flawed. So fundamentally flawed that it arguably paved the way for other insufferable pieces of content afterwards. So fundamentally flawed that you cannot make a case in good faith that it wasn't balanced around strats. So fundamentally flawed that it gives a run for his money. With Capac sneak peeks in play, I feel like it's finally appropriate to make this video. Today we're going over King Dullahan's boss fight and how it's flawed in every way possible. Let's get into the video. King Dullahan bombed Capac's reputation so hard it would be considered a terrorist attack. But how did this come to be? Well, let's look at the stats of King Dullahan and see what we're up against. King Dullahan is absurdly tanky, sporting a whopping 650 health, runaway AI on low health, and Horn of the Unicorn. It has an absurd bit economy in Burning Pledge, which now scales itself after every use. And it has relentless DPS in the form of Hellfire, which is fueled by Burning Pledge, Dullahan's Calamity, and Pumpkin Collection. Although a mini-boss that does everything at once isn't really an issue if it's accompanied by appropriate minions, or none at all. While Pumpkin Full has DPS and Exploding Arrow, Bit Economy and Sugar Rush, and Disruption in more or less the rest of its loadout, it's balanced out by his minions being relatively squishy. Pumpkin folks only have 250 health, Lazy Sneals with 75, and his Wands with only 20. So let's see how King Dullahan fares with his minions. What am I looking at? No, seriously. What the hell is this? Quote-unquote minions with a whopping 500 health, meditation, and the combination of Horn of the Unicorn and Runaway AI? Pre-nerf Elite Pyromancer who? Make multiple of them run away, and one of them will almost always get a Horn of the Unicorn off, usually undoing turns of progress. This isn't even considering the fact that all three of them litter the field with Pumpkin Collections, 7 whole traps that each do a total of 40 damage and an AoE of 1. The just use Extinguish argument is laughable, just like how just use Hot Cocoa was with 0-bit Cold Glare. With how long the fight is, as you're staring down a combined 1,650 health, you're bound to run out of burn answers. And then what? Hocus extinguishes of all things back in a fight when you're dealing with health sponges that require a lot of damage to defeat? But let's say you're burning and you have an extinguish ready. Oh right, he has Trick or Treat. Your burn answer has been discarded, mostly out of your control, and now you have to take all of its damage. Not only do you have to deal with health sponges with global heals, but they have non-stop burn damage and will discard your answers out of nowhere. The only way to reasonably navigate this fight is through strats, and even that's shaky, because I'm sure Zorand added Trick or Treat in there to bounce around strats. But it's not like most of Capac's content revolves around this fight, to the point where the fight is the most important one in Capac. Well, the issues with King Dullahan's fight are amplified tenfold by how its drops are highly relevant for Capac's content, yet absurdly hard to come by. First, let's look at his drops. 1% for a Dragon Crystal, and 2% for a Dragon Ash, and only 1 guaranteed King Candy. Despite Dullahan's being a slightly less powerful King Dullahan, they only have King Candy rates clocking in at 3 and 4%. Absurdly low, but this would only be an issue if King Dullahan's drops were prominent for Capac content. To answer this, here's a list of all the Capac NPC trade-ins. That's right, 2/3 of all the bulk NPC trade-ins for Capac are King Dullahan related, and nothing has been done to make this fight reasonable despite it being the most relevant fight in Capac. A total of 30 Dragon Ash for the Haunted Knight set, 44 for everything listed, and we're not even getting in the King Candy amounts, only 1 guaranteed to drop per battle by the way, for this list. But wait, we haven't even gotten to the King Candy specific trades, which are dependent on grinding this unfun fight. What, are you gonna farm Dullahans? Yeah, have fun with that. 170 for a Lesser Wisp, 350 for a Ghost Noisemaker, and if you are unlucky and didn't get the chance to open bags in their rotation years, 269 King Candy for all the legendaries currently in stock. Combined with what you have to fight to get the drops, and who the hell would want to casual the King Dullahan fight, especially within a 2-week time frame? However, I know what you're asking. How long exactly is the current grind for players? How bad is the King Dullahan fight really? Well, to go over this, we need to specify two things: strat time and drops needed. Based on what I could find on YouTube, the average King Dullahan strat is 4 minutes long, as this video was sped up by a quarter. For our drops needed, we're going to be going off this following list: both Haunted Knights, Legendary Capac Explorer, accounting for the 4/4 Essence drop 2, Lesser Wisp Lantern, Spirit Flame Lantern, a full set of Lesser Wisps, and a Ghost Noisemaker. This totals to 22 Trick or Treats, 44 Dragon Ash, 17 Dragon Crystals, 1 Essence of Capac 4/4, and a whopping 1,000 King Candy. Before I even get into the calcs, I would like to point out that on average, you're getting 1.34 King Candy per fight, which is atrocious for casual and still abysmal for stratting. Tell me this wasn't balanced around strats. However, back to the grind. Now that we have our numbers, I made a Python code simulation which calculates how many fights it would take to get all these drops. And when I said I made it, I really meant that I asked ChatGPT. The simulation runs the 4-minute King Dullahan grind until it's able to get all the drops for the Capac grinds listed. To avoid outliers, the code does this simulation 5,000 times, then calculates the mean, median, and standard deviation. It also gets the probability of a simulation that finishes the grind before a set amount of time, which I didn't ask for, but really shows how long this torture method takes on average. By the way, if you want to try this simulation yourself, I put a paste bin in the comments where you can get the code and then run it on a Python site yourself. So, I ran this simulation, and here's what I got. There comes a point where It's a Difficult Grind can't justify a piece of content, especially when 2/3 of the grinds in Capac are this type of mastery grind. Most areas of the game only have one of these for a reason, because, well, it's a mastery grind. On average, over 2,200 fights to finish the grind, around 150 hours of gameplay. Where's the fun in this? I'd like to remind you guys that Capac is usually open for 2 weeks, and people have lives outside of Hexaria. Imagine being new to the community and staring down a 150-hour grind when Capac rolls around to get everything. This isn't even accounting for the 30-second enemy respawn time between fights, which amplifies these numbers even further. This brings up the point again. Why would you casual this fight, which is very insufferable to casual by the way, when you're staring down as big of a grind as this, with an average 1.34 King Candy rate per fight? I feel like nobody's brought up the sheer scale of all of these grinds combined because they weren't all released in the same year. However, there's a point to be made that staring down all of these just shows how casualing this fight is unconditionally off the table. It's not fun, and it's been like this for half a decade, exponentially getting worse with each Capac. You can't, in good faith, say this is good for the game. How do you fix as big of a mistake as King Dullahan? First off, we need to establish that simple stat nerfs aren't going to cut it. Why? It's been tried before. Clearly, it doesn't work. Running it back would be stupid. To accomplish this, I have a few concepts which would make this grind much better, yet still somewhat challenging. This would involve the fight itself, its rates, and its corresponding trade-ins. First off, Katie's fight has to be casual friendly. It happened with Pumpkin Full last year, and people loved it. There's no excuses to avoid doing the same with King Dullahan. In order to make this happen, we're making King Dullahan's fight have an actual gimmick. King Dullahan turns into a primarily support miniboss, keeping Horn of the Unicorn and all of its DPS options, save for maybe Pumpkin Collection, turning into support options, such as attack buffs, support bit gains, and heals. He'll also lose a good deal of his health. The Dullahans will be replaced by primarily DPS-based enemies. I'm thinking maybe themed as a Dullahan Knight? I don't know. We'll just go with that for the theme here. They'll lose Horn of the Unicorn and Pumpkin Collection and gain Telesword themed attacks. Potential reskin opportunities, by the way. These Dullahan Knights will have less health than Dullahans, but a slight passive defense modifier. Basically, you'll fight 2 DPS enemies and a support miniboss backing them up. The next part is entirely optional, but would fit into King Dullahan's egotistical personality. King Dullahan could have a passive where his deck changes into a DPS loadout and gets stat buffs if you defeat both of his knights before he dies. You know, he gets angry because you defeated his knights or something. Drake the type of person to watch his minions die and say, if you want to do something right, do it yourself. This would give King Dullahan's fight an actual gimmick, as you're no longer fighting 3 health sponges, but rather enemies with their own strengths and weaknesses. King Dullahan can't really defend himself, but can bolster his allies, until they go down. The Dullahan Knights hit hard, but are dependent on King Dullahan's support to truly be a threat to your team. Give players a well-balanced fight with some layers of strategy, and they'll want to casual it. It's that simple. However, we have another issue that needs to be addressed alongside it. King Dullahan's drops are the most hated part of the fight, full stop. An average of 1.34 King Candies per fight. You could make the fight more casualable, but without reasonable drops, it means nothing if you're going for an NPC trade-in, which you probably are. I have two propositions for this. One with a reworked fight in mind, and one which keeps the boring health sponge fight. The drop changes if there's a reworked fight will give King Dullahan better drops across the board, with at least one more guaranteed King Candy drop. This ups the fight average King Candy rate to 2.3, not even counting the Dullahan Knights, which will probably up the rates much further. King Dullahan's Dragon Ash and Dragon Crystal rates will also see an increase. I'm thinking 4 to 5 for Dragon Ashes and 2 to 3% for Dragon Crystals. Quick reminder that you need 44 Dragon Ashes and 17 Dragon Crystals for everything in Capac. The scenario, which keeps the current fight, or lowers its stats a bit, will be a little bit different. As the fight still has an insufferable gimmick, King Dullahan will not just gain an extra guaranteed King Candy drop, but more non-guaranteed King Candy drops too. Dullahans will also get an increased King Candy rate. Those things are King Dullahans without the Trick or Treat, Dullahan's Calamity, Burning Pledge, or Hellfire. Up their rates already. King Dullahan will also get the Dragon Ash and Dragon Crystal drop rate increases in case that wasn't implied here. Third, something entirely optional, but would greatly help how future Capac content is created without it overwhelming players. I feel like the devs need to declare that one of these trade-ins, probably the Lanterns, is the mastery trade-in for Capac, and then tone down all the other trade-ins to an extent. 2.2k fights is only a thing because each of these trade-ins have been looked at as a mastery trade-in, until the next one appears. Have one true grind fest for Capac, and that's it. As for how I'd tone down the other trade-ins, Haunted Knight loses some Dragon Ashes required, Legendary Capac Explorer actually stays as is because the drop rate increases for King Candy would fix it. Wisp gets reduced to somewhere between 100 to 125 each. Still a high price, but manageable to get a full set without alt farming. Remember, it's a rare card. Hired Pumpkinful is an ultra rare reskin, which costs less than my proposed suggestion, as Hired Peaful costs 90 King Candy each. Lastly, Ghost Noisemaker gets reduced to somewhere between 250 to 300. Noisemakers are hard to come by in Hexaria, but 350 King Candy is pushing the limits. It needs a decrease. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about the bag legendaries? And I'm so glad you asked. Why would I pay King Candy for these when the Overseer is right there? No, seriously. Event shops should be easier for the player to obtain event cards compared to the Overseer shop, as the event shops are only there for a limited time. Bag legendaries should get their prices cut to between 50 to 65 King Candy each. Still a bit of a grind to get, but not obsoleted by the Overseer. King Dullahan is the biggest example in Hexaria about how a repeatedly neglected piece of content can snowball into a massive problem. The combination of rebalances that didn't address the fight's problems, with steadily increasing mastery grinds that require the fight to be farmed, has made a fight that isn't fun to casual, and isn't reasonable to casual due to the small time frame that it's around in the first place. Botching a King Dullahan rebalance, or outright ignoring King Dullahan's shortcomings for this Capac, wouldn't just be tone deaf, it would be tone senseless. If we're truly out of the era of making content not fun, then this fight should be front and center for a rework this Capac. Until then, this fight is a masterclass in mediocrity. See ya.